I'm really delighted that we've got James Tugendhat, who's the Chief Executive of HC1, who are the UK's largest care home provider. James joined as CEO in September, so only a few months into the role, from a US-based early years provider, Bright Horizons. So thank you, James, for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
How's it been? 3 months straight into it. What's been your views on your arrival in the sector since you've got here?
I think with the passing of New Year, all of us have been sort of reflecting on the year as a whole, and it's certainly been a very challenging 3 months and a difficult time to join any new sector. But I suppose the main thing I've just been reflecting on with the passing of the years is, the very real loss of life, and that for many of those we care for, their lives have been cut short, colleagues have passed away, and families have been separated. And so when we talk in all the superlatives about what an unprecedented year it's been, we always have to keep coming back to the very real personal suffering and grief that COVID has caused.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, what more can I say?
What have been the practicalities of operating in a global pandemic? I mean, you've got such a huge organisation. I don't know how many staff. 20,000?
20 plus thousand, yeah.
16,000 residents, something like that.
That's exactly right. I mean, the biggest thing, the biggest, while I've just referenced the very real suffering that families have gone through, it's also been an incredible year in terms of how colleagues have come together. Yeah. I mean, I have been truly awed in the short time I've been at HC1 by the resilience, the dedication, the selflessness of our teams. Yeah. And there's virtually nothing, to your question, that hasn't changed. I mean, COVID's sort of thrown everything up in the air, and it has meant that everyone's had to really rethink all their focus and so much of what their job involves. But the way our teams have just risen to the challenge, and the way, despite at the very early stages, people not knowing what the disease meant for their own families, despite the disruption, I've just been awed by the way those of our colleagues, and I think across the sector, have just put the safety and well-being of those in our care first.
Do you think the government have helped you? What's their response been like as far as you've been concerned as an organisation? Do you think it's been supportive? I mean, we all understand the challenges that have come for government in terms of making decisions throughout the whole of 2020, but do you think it's been helpful?
As we've all recognised from the start, this has just been an unprecedented challenge, and I don't think there's a government around the world that hasn't been found wanting. And we could spend our whole interview on what could have been done better, but I think we also have to recognise that government, and now you can't act too fast often in these situations, but we also have to recognise that government has come with very real support, both financial and more recently with the expansion of testing. And one of the things we're really proud of at the moment, and one of the things where we're really moving fast, is on the vaccine rollout. And I'm really excited by the fact that over 20% now of those we care for, and over 20% of our colleagues have now been vaccinated. And we are at this incredibly difficult moment right now where we're both in the middle of a very bleak winter, and yet we've got the sort of spring is within sight. You know, the single biggest thing we can do with government as a sector right now is to get the rollout working as fast as possible. And that's how we work together to make it happen. So Scotland was actually the first to vaccinate residents in care. Both nations and Wales are actually moving pretty well in tandem at the moment on the rate of vaccinations. And so over the last year, while there have been different policies and you know, that have had sort of worked in different ways across the nations, some better than others at different times. Right now, the pace of vaccination is really strong across all three.
That's got to be positive for us all, hasn't it? I mean, that's one of the...
It has. And, you know, we make a lot of national... in the press, we often make a lot of the fact that we've got different approaches in the three nations. But we also have to recognise the populations we serve are very different across the country. And the needs of our homes in Manchester just aren't the same as the needs of our homes in rural Wales or in the islands of Scotland. And so a local policy is often the right one when it's tailored to the community in question. I think as a sector, thanks to groups like yours and others, you know, we all stay pretty close and have a good sense of how the sector dynamics are playing out. And we did see that pick up in autumn and it's come off again. And, you know, and I think it's going to stay suppressed for some time to come. I mean, in the end, what is it that our families need? They need to know that care is safe. And they also need to know that care will support their ability to stay in touch with their family.
Yeah, yeah.
And at first, this was all about safety. But what I think we've come to recognise is that this is about safety and about our ability to allow our families to unite in ways that are right for each family. And so until I think consumers' sentiment changes, until people are confident that going into care is safe and that they'll be able to stay in touch, it's going to be hard for people to come back into care in the numbers that we obviously would like. And you know, I think my hope would be that with the rollout of the vaccine, you know, we can quite quickly move to an environment where society at large recognises that care is really safe. And in some ways, perhaps the safest place for loved ones to be. Now, having said all that, while I think we've got a sort of a performance challenge in the short term, I don't think any of the underlying dynamics have changed.
Yeah.
The family's need for care is so much around the expansion, you know, the expanding rates of dementia, the fact that just at a certain stage in life, it becomes very hard to manage care at home, whatever support you have. And so I think those very physical needs mean that as soon as families feel that we're safe and open, we'll see families rejoin us and therefore occupancy come back.
What's the sort of correlation between your time in early years organisations and moving into care in terms of how the businesses differ and the staff groups and those kind of things? Have you seen, is there a...
I mean, you know, every sector is obviously different, but I think there are lots of parallels to what I'd describe as the broader care sector. You know, one of the strongest parallels is the people. That I think whether you're working with younger children or with the more mature members of our society, anyone who goes into care is a very special type of person. and is making an incredible commitment, and tends to go into the profession for the difference that they can make and for the care that they can bring. And I just really enjoy working with colleagues who want to make a difference every day, and who are passionate about what they do.
From a business perspective, obviously staffing is historically and still is the most significant cost and issue within the industry in terms of how you look after and recruit people. Have you been able to recruit more staff because of the general position in society?
Yeah, so I think one of the other real positives for the sector, for the elder care sector, for nursing care out of this crisis, has been the acknowledgement of the value that
Yeah.
the sector brings. And one of the great challenges we deal with in the UK is the sort of the division between health and care, the separation of social care and adult social care and the NHS, and the fact
Cinderella
that
sector.
the Cinderella sector. And again, we could spend this whole interview on the degree to which the sector has been underfunded, and the degree to which the workforce has been underappreciated and insufficiently rewarded. Now, we're a long way from a lot of that changing. But what has changed is the sentiment towards the sector. What has changed is that I think people across the country can really see the risks that people in care are taking and the commitment that people in care are bringing and the difference that they make. And we've seen that in the number of people who want to join the sector. Now, I think one of the things that is really important about this crisis is that we take the opportunity to build a better sector. And I think often within the sector, we talk about the need for reform, and the reform is really needed. We need more investment in the sector, but we also need to do more ourselves. And I think the best way that we, certainly as HC1 and more broadly across the sector, can the best way we can honour the incredible commitment and resilience that our colleagues have brought is to ensure that we raise the level of training, development, the level of pay, reward, the recognition that care has, and the appreciation in society at large for just what a difficult and skilled occupation it is, and that we reward it in a way that recognises that skill and commitment.
Given the challenges that you already have in terms of recruiting staff, we all have as a sector, how do you think Brexit will impact on that?
So I think Brexit is, the impact for us now on Brexit is quite limited. So I think both in the earlier sector and in this sector, the impact was felt quite early on when just with the devaluation of the pound, a number of colleagues who had been working who had been based in the UK from other European countries returned home. But I think a lot of that has now gone through the system, and so for ourselves at HC1, it's quite the number of European colleagues that we have is really quite low, and we're assisting most of them, all of them, in getting residency and staying with us. Now that a deal has been struck, while we're likely to see some food price increases, I think we've all got certainty, the certainty that we've been looking for. So I think looking ahead, Brexit hasn't helped staffing, but I think looking ahead, it's going to be much more around how we ensure that we capitalise on the new focus that people have on care, the desire to join care, and that we get the reward and recognition right within care to make sure colleagues want to stay. Because in the end, to your point about so much of the long-term profitability of the sector being around the management of staff cost. Well, the best way of managing your staff cost is to retain colleagues for longer, and to have a long-serving community. And so, so much of how we'll manage cost in the long term is by making ourselves a better place to work, and a more attractive place to work.
We did a sentiment survey to the industry at large, and it was quite interesting. Some of the responses. 92% of people felt that their business had been significantly impacted by COVID. I don't know what the other 8%. They were rather lucky, I think, in terms of how it did. But I think the interesting point was that about 60% felt it was going to take 1 to 3 years to recover to pre-sort of COVID levels in terms of how they get there operationally. But 40% were more optimistic that we'd get there sooner. What's your view, James?
And once admissions start returning to normal, it takes a bit of time for that to flow through in terms of occupancy, and then to flow through to the sort of bottom line, and to put us all back in, to be the strong and sustainable players that we want to be to serve in the long term. So I think we've got a bit of time to go before that recovery really comes. But again, as I said earlier, I think once the recovery starts, it'll be quite quick. That there will be pent-up demand, and people who have just been delaying a decision that they've known they need to take. And so I think once the return to admissions comes, it will come quite fast. And that this will have been a sort of a 2-year, a really difficult couple of years, but there's a real opportunity to build back stronger. And I think we've learned a lot, as I said, about what it takes to create a better place to work. We've changed a lot of working practices in terms of just empowering frontline colleagues in ways that we weren't before. Teams have really come together, and we've embraced technology in ways that we just hadn't before.
That was going to be one of my questions. How is technology? I mean, we're now talking on Zoom. How has it impacted on your own business in terms of day-to-day work?
So I mean, technology has been impacting the business for some time, but it's amazing how it takes these sort of events to sort of fully appreciate how much, and to sort of to see all the benefits. But I think we've seen technology in several ways in this sort of interaction, in enabling families to be in touch, and recognizing that actually age is never it doesn't stop you being able to enjoy seeing your family across the screen. We've also seen how it can help in supporting colleagues' effectiveness at work, with both e-care and sort of simplifying the administrative tasks and the clinical tasks behind care, and therefore giving people more time to just be with those that we care for. Yeah. We've also seen what a huge difference it can make in training. And so much of how we can both honor, as I said, the commitment of our colleagues and develop the skills of our workforce is how we train and develop. And recognizing that so much of that's going to be on the job training, and learning just how many better ways there are to train online in bite-sized chunks, in ways that are relevant to the job that we all do, in language that we can all appreciate, and just taking us away from that old-fashioned classroom, which often never worked. So I think one of the real themes that we can mine in the future is leveraging technology for training and development.
As property people, one of the questions I've got was, are there any learnings from COVID around the design of buildings? Obviously, you've got a portfolio. Yes. You've got the largest portfolio in the UK, 300 odd homes, ranging from older purpose-built through to brand new buildings. Are there any significant learnings?
Yes, I mean, there's at lots of levels. I mean, so this is largely an airborne disease, and so the whole way homes are ventilated, the importance of purifying air, just the fact that being able to keep windows open can make a huge difference. And, and so often in even the design of more recent homes, how we thought about public space and where people congregate was very different. And so, so I think as we really sort of digest learnings, there's going to be quite a lot that comes out of that will sort of inform new home design. But I think one of the things that's been really important learning for us is the role of the room, and that in the end, your home is your home. And we've often been very focused in home around public space, but actually your room for you as the resident is often your home. And so the importance of getting the room right, which doesn't mean you don't then enjoy all the communal area and the public space and all the meeting that goes with that, but to build the home very thoughtfully from the room out. And then to think about public space in ways that ensure that when necessary, we can segregate communities more easily to stop transmission.
One of the thorny questions is obviously the question of funding and fees. Yeah. And obviously, given, in my mind, the sector's had the spotlight shown on it in many positive lights, it's also had the negativity sort of borne out on the front pages of newspaper, which has not been helpful for the sector, I don't think, in some respects. But maybe we now have the recognition that the sector needs from government. Do you think the government will review things properly now going forward in terms of funding?
So it's certainly my hope, and I think reform is more likely now than it has been for a long time. And, if you go back in time, whether it's Andy Burnham's reforms at the end of Gordon Brown's premiership, whether it's the Dilnot Commission, whether it was Theresa May's more recent attempts at reform, one of the things that has then sort of brought that reform to an end has actually been the opposition, and the fact that as most reform is going to involve more government spend and families spending more, it's always then been quite easy to criticise reform. Any reform that means everyone paying more, even if they get more, is always going to be vulnerable. And so I think one of the things that's really positive at the moment is not only is the government talking about reform, but the opposition really recognises that reform's important. The fact that we are still in the midst of the biggest, one of the biggest crises any of us have faced in our own lifetimes, means the imperative for reform is really strong. And the government has made has made several comments about just how much focus it is putting on reform. So yes, I think we are more likely to see it. And we also don't want to forget that government has been providing a lot of financial support, going back to March now, to our sector in particular over others. And again, I think just that continued support is welcome, and the fact that the government has signalled that it recognises the demands of vaccination, the demands of extra testing now, and has been signalling in various ways the continued need for financial support in the short term. So you add those together, and I'm really optimistic. Having said all that, people have been talking about reform in the sector for 30 years, and many of us will no doubt see out our time to our own retirement, before it happens. So hoping for it, believing in it, trying to influence it, but we're not relying on it.
That's been really, really interesting, James. From your perspective, looking forward, what do you think 2021 brings for you as an organisation and as a sector?
Well, I'm really excited. I'm really excited about what 2021 can bring. And I mean, as I said, and as we've all acknowledged, I mean, we've got a really difficult few weeks and months ahead, but we've got an incredible opportunity to learn from the last year or more and to build a better sector. And we've got that opportunity in terms of government reform and bringing more funding into social care. But we've got the opportunity in terms of already the recognition that we need to have stronger links and create more integrated care with the National Health Service. We've got the opportunity in terms of people recognizing the value of social care and wanting to be part of it. Just the whole way commissioning is already changing to be more integrated, the way that the NHS is taking more responsibility for delivering care within our community. And certainly for us at HC1, as I said, the opportunity for us to really build better working models, more flexible working models, so that our colleagues can better balance work and life, so that we can invest more in training and development, and so that we can honour the difference and commitment that people have brought over the last year by just building a better HC1. And that's exciting us, albeit while we manage the daily challenge of the crisis we're still living in right now.
I've bought into that, James. I'm excited. That's good.
We'll do it together as a sector, won't we?
Yeah, that's really good. People see the sector as doom and gloom, and it shouldn't be, should it? Because both from a market perspective and operationally, you've risen to the challenges.
I think most of us in the sector, whether it's as the care providers or for colleagues like yourself and others, I think we can all see the long-term value is still there, and if anything, greater. And we see that in terms of investor appetite. It's just a mind the gap problem, and we've just got a short-term challenge to get through, but we're just not Cinderella sort of. It's easy to forget in all of this how tough things were before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so we weren't sustainable, and that really might change.
Having the spotlight shown on the sector, it's got to be positive, hasn't it?
It's got to be positive. It's got to be positive. And look, you're obviously trying to draw out a bit on government response. And it's just my view there is always that it's very easy to criticize. We all know the early days of what went wrong. But the important thing, certainly for us as HC1, is to just try and influence government to get it right going forward. Yeah. Not to dwell on what wasn't right.
Yeah. James, thank you very much. That's been really interesting, and I really appreciate you talking to us. We'll be incorporating this as part of our Business Outlook launch. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, and it's always my pleasure to work with Christie. You're a great partner to all of us in the sector.
Thank you, James. Much appreciated.